Return to Defiance, Blue Jean Werewolf Revisited. Back in May, we ran a sort of random episode where I went back into history, talking about the Defiance Werewolf from 1972. I'll put a link to that episode in the description, but we are going to include most of the info from that later in this show. This werewolf or wolfman creature or person got reported multiple times in local newspapers in Ohio in 1972. And even the police there issued serious public statements that seemed to imply that the witnesses were believed when they reported to the local precinct that they had been being menaced, some at their jobs and some at their homes, by a 7-foot or taller, bipedal humanoid covered in fur all over. Some people say this was a Dogman, but if so, he remains the only Dogman I ever heard of that wore blue jeans. According to the witnesses. Sounds more like a real-life werewolf, but are werewolves and shapeshifters a real thing? Like many such monster flaps, the creature or hairy man eventually stopped appearing, and the drama remained confined to the summer of 1972, exactly 50 years ago this year. So I made my special episode about it, and then YouTube demonetized the famous channel for reading stuff written by other people. At that point, I backed off any more historical stories and went back to adapting viewer submissions for a while. That YouTube situation does seem to have blown over though, so when I got an interesting email from a guy named Jerry Hamm, a native of Defiance, Ohio no less, containing images he had paid the local Ohio newspapers to pull out of old issues for him. In other words, for a price, newspapers with long histories can search their library and give you every story or photo on the subject you're interested in. Mr. Hamm was kind enough to allow me to share these photos with you, which is why he's our executive producer for this episode. A number of questions I raised in the previous show are answered by this newly discovered information, so you definitely want to stay tuned or skip forward to that. I think we all owe Jerry Hamm a debt of thanks, as I will be presenting not only his research, but some of his theories as well. One of his theories I think I believe in even more than he does, while the other one I'm not quite as sure about, but it's still certainly fascinating. I'll try to stick to the details so you can make up your own mind, or maybe be inspired to do your own research. Now, I've heard and read a number of Dogman stories in my time, obviously, but I am not very familiar with the fact that werewolf sightings had become a thing in the middle of the country in the early 1970s. I'm learning from Mr. Hamm's research that about a year before the Defiance, Ohio flap, the one we're mainly going to be talking about here, there were other hairy humanoids being seen in other places in the middle of the country. This next story actually happened some miles north of Wichita Falls, Texas, in Lawton, Oklahoma. Let me read you this article Jerry Hamm found in the Wichita Falls, Texas Times from March 2nd, 1971, which is about 16 months before things got crazy in Defiance. Then after that, we'll get back into Defiance, and I think you'll note the similarities. Page 16. Causes heart attack. Witnesses see, quote, wolfman, unquote, running loose in Lawton. Lawton, Oklahoma, AP. This was on the AP wire. Lawton police are looking for a wolfman seen on 4 different occasions by different witnesses, one of whom suffered a heart attack as a result of his sighting. The creature was sighted by at least 4 persons or groups of people Friday and Saturday night in separate parts of West Lawton. Donald Childs, 35, suffered a heart attack Saturday night after he saw the creature in his front yard on its hands and feet trying to drink water out of an empty homemade fish pond, police officer Clancy Williams said. Williams said Childs described the creature as tall with a lot of hair all over his face and dressed in an indescribable manner. Childs then suffered the heart attack, Williams said, and was released Sunday in good condition from a Lawton hospital, doesn't say which one. Other witnesses said it appeared the creature was wearing pants which were far too small for him. The sightings began Friday night, Lawton police said. Police received the first report from passers-by in West Lawton who saw something apparently wearing a mask and resembling an ape. Witnesses said the creature was running down the street, dodging cars, hiding behind bushes, and then running again, police officer Harry Ezel said. It was 20 minutes later, Ezel said, that a man 5 blocks from the first sighting reported seeing the creature. He told me he saw the thing when he opened the window curtain about 11:15 p.m. He thought it was all a practical joke because the subject was perched on the railing. It looked like some monkey or ape. He thought it was a joke until it turned its head and looked at him, then jumped off its perch on the second floor railing onto the ground 17 feet below. The man told me the person ran from the area on all fours, something like an ape or monkey would. He described it wearing only pants, which covered his leg to near his knee, as if it had outgrown the pants. He described it as having a horribly distorted face, as if it had been in a fire, and it had hair all over its face, upper parts of the body, and lower parts of its legs. 15 minutes later, a group of Fort Sill soldiers at a grocery store 3 blocks from the last sighting reported being scared by something resembling the other descriptions. Then, on Saturday night, Child saw the creature and suffered the heart attack. Major Clarence Hill, commander of the Police Patrol Division, alerted Lawton patrolmen Monday night to watch for the Wolfman. It's watchful waiting, Hill said today. Police tried to get footprints of the creature, but said the ground was too hard. Okay, that was 1971 Oklahoma. Now we're going to go back to 1972 Ohio. First, I want to tell the story again in case you're unfamiliar with any of this. I'm going to run much of that original information now from our first episode to get us all on the same page before I continue. And then we'll start to introduce the newly found information that Jerry Hamm has gathered, which I completely missed in that first episode. If you've already seen that show, then please feel free to jump to that time on screen right now. If you haven't seen it before, or if you just need a refresher, then keep watching. After this, we'll begin adding the new information that Mr. Hamm has shared with us. So now let's cut to me back in May. Take it away, me. So we do a lot of Dogman stories, and much of what we talk about happens in Michigan or Wisconsin. We tend to neglect the Midwestern states just to the south, though, namely Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. Today we've got a historical case of a Midwestern werewolf or wolfman that took place over the summer in Defiance, Ohio, in 1972. It was reported on by at least 2 local newspapers, and I'm just going to start reading from the first article so we can figure out exactly where this all happened. Okay, here's the Crescent News from Wednesday, August 2nd, 1972. Horror movie, now playing on 5th Street, by Ellen Armstrong, city editor. She starts off all jokey and sarcastic, as mainstream writers often will when discussing cryptids. She quotes the poem from the old Universal Wolfman movies. Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is clear and bright. Defiance police, possibly armed with silver bullets and sharpened stakes, are on the lookout for a wolfman who on 3 occasions has accosted persons near the Norfolk and Western Railroad tracks in the vicinity of 5th Street and Swift & Co. I tried searching online for Swift & Company, and I discovered that there's been a meat packing company and a real estate company using that name. Are any of you guys from the Defiance, Ohio area? Would you know what Swift & Company was on 5th Street in Defiance in 1972? Well, let's go to Google Maps and look for ourselves and see what we can find. 5th Street begins here as the Hopkins Street Bridge comes across the Auglaize River, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. It continues to the northwest, getting diverted a half block to the right on Jefferson Avenue. I guess we're looking for railroad tracks, so let's just stare and see what we see. I'm seeing box stores, factories, and parking lots. It looks like a commercial district. We passed Clinton. We passed Perry. We pass Jackson, then aha, see railroad tracks running alongside this three-way intersection. You know, crossroads are the traditional home of the devil, and this one even sort of resembles a sideways pitchfork too. Check it out. We've found the neighborhood that the 1972 Wolfman reports happened in. Let's go down to Street View and look around. Here we are, the actual train tracks where the werewolf was seen. The first thing I'm noticing is that church in the distance. So we're talking about a sighting of a possibly demonic presence at a crossroads near a church? This story is already a lot more interesting than I would have thought. Now, this street view we're looking around inside of was taken in the year 2013, which was 41 years after the Wolfman sightings happened, and 9 years before I'm writing this all down in New York. I don't know how much of what we're seeing is still there, just as I don't know how much of it was already there in 1972, but we can kinda guess. That school and that factory look old enough. Certainly the railroad tracks are still the same ones from that era. Now let's look at the pitchfork-shaped intersection, and well, I'll be, that's another church, isn't it? So these werewolf encounters seem to have happened at a pitchfork-shaped crossroads, directly in between two churches? I'm telling you, truth can be stranger than fiction. I'm gonna wander us around the neighborhood for a while, and we can try to pretend we're back in 1972, in the middle of the dark night, and we're in this exact place, seeing with our own eyes the infamous Wolfman of Defiance. Back to the original article by Ellen Armstrong from the Crescent News on August 2nd, 1972, where we discover that this cryptid flap has actually been going on for some time before this article was written. And that quote, "2 of the incidents occurred last week and 1 last night. None has happened during a full moon." According to Defiance Police Department, 1 man was attacked and struck on the shoulder with a 2x4. However, managed to get away from the assailant. 2 other attempts on residents, both men, have not been successful, so the department can't say if the motive is robbery or just to scare people. No one has reported neck bites. He, she, or it is described as very tall, with some kind of an animal head. That part gave me the chills. It was a man with an animal head. That implies he was wearing clothes, so it would be a werewolf or lougarou or rougarou, not a dogman in the traditional Midwestern sense. Also, the part about him brandishing a 2x4 and using it as a weapon seems to indicate that this guy had thumbs and probably had at least part of a human brain inside of his head, at least some of the time. Like one of the legends about the rougarou in Louisiana is that it still has a human mind, although a dulled version of one. For instance, one old way to keep the rougarou from breaking into your house was said to be to leave 13 pennies on your doorstep. The rougarou will attempt to count the pennies, but his dulled down mind can't remember how to count past the number 12. He will remain at your doorstep all night, counting to 12 over and over again, until the sun comes up and he returns to human form. Could that be what those poor guys working for that railroad company in 1972 were forced to deal with? Could it have actually been a shape-shifting werewolf or rougarou? Let's read some more. Police Chief Don F. Breckler today said if anyone sees the subject, they should not attempt to apprehend him, but call the department immediately, giving a description and the direction in which he was heading. The attacks have occurred during the early morning hours, from 1:30 a.m. to 4:20 a.m. before sunrise. Wait, 4:20? Is that another of her snide remarks, or was that random? Did 4:20 mean anything yet in 1972? Well, I just looked it up, and the term did originate in 1971 in California, but was not popularized in print until High Times did it in 1991. One of the originators of the term became a roadie for the Grateful Dead, so Deadheads have used the term since the 1970s. I don't think the city editor of the Crescent News in 1972 was a traveling Grateful Dead groupie, though. So I guess Ms. Armstrong didn't even know she was being funny when she wrote that. Now let's check the paper from the next day, Thursday, August 3rd, 1972. The werewolf must have read about himself in the paper that morning, because he got extra rambunctious that night, from the sounds of it. And I quote, "Wolfman reports persist. The shadow of the Wolfman stalked Defiance last night. 3 persons, near hysteria, sought police protection from, quote, the thing, unquote, although they never saw it." At 1:24 a.m. today, a man came into the police station to report that something had followed him on foot from Dietrich and South Clinton Street to the Hotel Henry. He indicated he didn't see anything, but he knew it was there because he had, quote, a crawly feeling up the back of his neck, unquote. The report said the man was near hysteria and spent the remainder of the night in the lobby of the hotel. Okay, so I found out that Dietrich and South Clinton is about a 20-minute walk from the last sightings I was telling you about, where the Wolfman was armed with that 2x4. I have not been able to find the Hotel Henry online, but it's quite possible it's changed owners and names several times and might still be there. A number of hotels and inns do exist in Defiance, Ohio, but I haven't got a clue as to which of them might have once been called the Hotel Henry. Returning to the article, I quote, "About 10 minutes later, a North Side resident called police, saying her lady friend was at her house, quote, almost in hysterics. She had read about, quote, the thing, unquote, and was, quote, scared to death, unquote. She requested that officers talk to her friend. She told them that about 2 a.m. every day, someone rattled her doorknob." Police have been looking for a person who has attacked one man and attempted attacks on 2 others near the Norfolk and Western Railroad track in the vicinity of 5th Street and Swift & Co. The assailant has been dubbed the Wolfman because he is said to wear some type of animal mask. Police have not determined if his motive is robbery or if he just wants to put on a fright act. Friday, August 4th, 1972, from the Crescent News. 1 Wolfman report logged. Defiance Police Department received only 1 report of a possible excursion by the Wolfman last night. A North Side resident, according to the report, called police saying she had heard scratching at the door and, quote, "If anything came through it, I will shoot it." So now the fact that all these articles were from that same newspaper, the Crescent News, in 1972, one might be led to think that this was a hoax they were pulling off, attempting to boost their sales with a monster gimmick. However, that wouldn't explain why the Toledo, Ohio Blade ran this information-packed article on August 2nd by their staff writer, James Stiegel. I'll quote now from that piece. "Werewolf case in Defiance, not viewed lightly by police. Chief cites concern over reported sightings of large beast and attack." By James Stiegel, Blade staff writer. Defiance, Ohio. Some people here are jokingly referring to it as the case of the werewolf, but Defiance police are serious about it. 3 persons have told police that they saw a large beast that resembles a werewolf lurking along railroad tracks near downtown Defiance in the last week. In each case, he was spotted during the early morning hours, and one man, a train crewman switching trains, said that he was approached from behind and was struck on the shoulder with a piece of 2x4 lumber. But when he ran, the werewolf also disappeared into some nearby brush. In the other reported incidents, the werewolf was seen by another train crewman about 3 a.m. Police say the third report came from a motorist who said it ran out in front of his car about 4 a.m. and then quickly disappeared. "We don't know what to think," Chief Donald Breckler said. "We didn't release it to the news media when we got the first report about a week ago, but now we're taking it seriously. We're concerned for the safety of our people." How about that? The local police chief informing the local mainstream media that he is genuinely concerned that the citizens he was sworn to protect might be in danger of attack from a werewolf in 1972. I wonder why I was not familiar with this story before. I mean, this is an extraordinarily interesting case. Let's read some more. Chief Breckler said that descriptions of the werewolf given by the three persons, police are not giving their names, that spotted him are similar. But he admits in each case, the description is, quote, vague, unquote. Very hairy is the first description given by each person who saw the werewolf. The chief said he thinks that a person is wearing some disguise, such as a mask. Quote, but there's a lot of natural hair too, unquote, he said. Now, the reason the chief might have thought the werewolf must be wearing a mask was because people reported that he was a man with an animal head. But how many masks were commercially available in 1972 that looked like a real animal head? Sure, now you can go to any Halloween store and get a really creepy and realistic looking mask that might really scare people in the dark. But in 1972? Go look at one of the Planet of the Apes movies from that era. Those makeups looked great, but not really realistic, and they took hours to apply. The actors couldn't even eat while wearing them. They had to sip things through straws. Here's an ad for what state-of-the-art monster masks looked like back then. They weren't as sophisticated or realistic as modern ones. But then again, the people seeing this Wolfman might themselves have been somewhat less in the know about such things as well. So what did the chief of police think was going on then? Quote, I'm inclined to think it might be a local person, Chief Breckler said. None of the other area towns have had anything like this, and in each case he's been seen in the same area of our town. Chief Breckler said that the creature wears dark clothing, and at first, reports described him as ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall. But that was a little exaggerated, the chief said. 7 to 9 feet tall? The chief says that was, quote, a little exaggerated? A little? And how does he know it was an exaggeration at all if he's never seen the beast himself? He never explains that. Is he just assuming that the werewolf couldn't have been that tall because it must have been a man, and men don't grow that tall? Is he leaping to conclusions here, or does he have more evidence that he's not sharing with the press that tells him the monster was not as tall as the people who actually were confronted by the creature claimed that he was? That's a big black hole in the middle of this case, unfortunately. Back to the article. Quote, 2 of the trainmen that reported seeing the werewolf work in the area during the early morning hours. Both of them are from Toledo. The third complaint came from a local grocery store employee, Mr. Breckler said. If his motive is robbery, then he's not picking on the type of person that would have a lot of money, Chief Breckler said. We don't know what his motive is. A railroad agent at the Norfolk and Western Depot on 5th Street here said that the switching crewmen from Toledo are the only persons that have spotted the werewolf. The agent, who did not identify himself, said that none of the other crewmen in the area seemed disturbed by the reports. We don't think it's a prank, Chief Breckler said. He's coming at people with a club in his hand. We think it's to the safety of our people to be concerned. You know, that's the first I've read about the beast carrying a club. I wonder if that's a reference to the time he attacked the man with a 2x4, or if the creature in fact wielded a club and other encounters we're not being told about. Now check out this next part of the article as it gets even wilder. Creature described as having fangs. 2 N&W brakemen interviewed at the railroad's Sumner Street Yard today said the creature had, quote, huge hairy feet, fangs, and ran from side to side like a caveman in the movies. Ted Davis and Tom Jones, good name, crewmen on the N&W local freight which serves Defiance on an overnight run, said that the large figure, which they said was between 6 and 8 feet tall, has appeared twice under a full moon. Quote, when we leave here, the moon is usually about a quarter full, but about 4 a.m. when we're working Defiance, the moon is full, Mr. Davis explained. I'm not sure that Mr. Davis or the author of this article were aware of what the term full moon meant, but they must have known what 6 to 8 feet meant. It seems that whatever people were seeing was at least as tall as the tallest people alive in that era. If it was in fact a human in a costume, he was wasting his time not pursuing an NBA contract. Back to the article in the Toledo Blade from August 1972, and I quote, "The creature was first seen July 25th, then again last Sunday," both men said. "When he first confronted Mr. Davis, the creature ran away before he, Mr. Davis, could say anything. Quote, I was connecting an air hose between two cars and was looking down. I saw these huge hairy feet. Then I looked up, and he was standing there with that big stick over his shoulder. When I started to say something, he took off for the woods." Okay, big stick over his shoulder. There you go. If he had huge feet, could this have been a Sasquatch instead of a werewolf then? The next thing the article says makes things even more confusing as we are informed, quote, "Both Mr. Davis and Mr. Jones saw the blue jean-clad figure again last Sunday morning in the yards. The creature was standing in some weeds near the main track." Wait, my head's hurting. The newspaper calls it a creature, but says it was wearing blue jeans. That means it was not a Sasquatch. Could it have been a were-squatch? Could it have been an extra hairy hippie freaking out on bad acid? I mean, we are talking about 1972 here. The next part of the article reads, quote, "At first I thought the whole thing was a big joke, but when I saw how hairy and woolly it was, that was enough for me," Mr. Jones said. He had laughed at Mr. Davis earlier in the week, but said that when he could account for all the railroad workers at the time, he knew it was not a crewman's joke. You know, I find it fascinating how many of the early Bigfoot witnesses reported that they couldn't be sure they weren't seeing some kind of a human being. Yet, these train workers have zero problem referring to this guy who's actually wearing blue jeans as an it. To me, that seems to indicate they knew they were not seeing someone wearing a mask. So, what kind of monster wears blue jeans then? Quote, "When they took off," Mr. Jones said, he and Mr. Davis also heard screams from a car stopped on a nearby road. Quote, "That thing's gonna hurt somebody someday," he said. And yet, that was the last anyone ever heard about the Dogman of Defiance. Did his parents make him get a haircut? Did he move north to Michigan or Wisconsin? I mean, I'm joking around, but this story genuinely unnerves me. This creature just appeared, freaked out the town and the police force, then just stopped bothering anyone. What the heck was it? I ask you to tell me. What was the Defiance Dogman of 1972? Thanks, me. Okay, now let's return to August 2022, and I'll start sharing the research and information that Defiance native Jerry Hamm has added to the pile. Check out this photo from 1972 that we got courtesy of Mr. Hamm, showing the police chief who admitted that these attacks really happened, standing right where one of them took place. Nice and clear, not a Xerox of something from a microfiche or whatever. Next, check out these two sharp and clear photos of Tom Jones. No, not that Tom Jones. This was one of the guys that the newspaper said was accosted by the werewolf at 5th and Swift & Co. Now, assuming you've seen our original video, which I just replayed, you know I had zero idea what that address meant. I couldn't find it on a map. So, where and what was Swift & Co.? Well, one of the articles that Jerry Hamm sent informs us of what the local 1960s slang for the location translates into in the 21st century. He sent me this article entitled Recalling Memories of Wolfman in 1970s Defiance by Lisa Nicely. It was originally published in the Crescent News of July 25th, 2013. That's 41 years after the original events, and 9 years ago as I'm recording this. I'll read this excerpt here. Quote, "The first printed report was on August 2nd, 1972, when police released information that on 3 occasions, individuals were accosted near the Norfolk and Western Railroad tracks near 5th Street and Swift & Co., which they translate in 2013 to mean on South Jackson Avenue. One man was struck on the shoulder by a 2x4-inch board, while there were attempted attacks on 2 others within a 2-week period. The assailant was described as, quote, very tall, with some kind of animal head. The attacks all occurred from 1:30 to 4:30 a.m., Then Police Chief Don Brecker warned residents not to attempt to apprehend the subject, but call the police immediately if he was seen. The department can't say if the motive is robbery or just to scare people, the article stated. Well, scare people. It did. So, when the newspaper said that the railroad workers were accosted, the witnesses, including Thomas Jones, had assumed it was on the tracks. It turns out, at least according to this 2013 article, that 5th Street and Swift & Co. translates into 5th Street and South Jackson. Here we are looking around on that corner. Somewhere over here, back in the early 70s, there was a Swift & Company factory. There are these two factory-ish buildings on opposite corners, either of which might have been the site where the men had a werewolf run at them. Jerry Hamm says the factory building had a fire a few years back and does not exist any longer, and since Jerry's from Defiance, I don't want to question him. He also says that this red building here used to be the Defiance Machine Works, DMW, from 1850 to 1949, and that they were a military contractor. I guess that means the factory must have been here probably, since this street view is 9 years old. In fact, we may be looking at a photo of the original building, which is no longer standing. Interestingly, this is not by the train tracks. Those are a full block away, over behind that red building. Let's go over there. This should look familiar. This is approximately where the most famous Defiance encounter took place, when the rail worker got whacked with a board or a stick by the hairy-footed, extra-tall man-beast. This is just 1 block away and 1 night away from where the workers were accosted. Since the Wolfman only appeared after 1 and before 5 a.m., nobody in Defiance ever saw him during the day. It's hard to know how long these people got to see the Beastman, or how good a look they got of him. The police believed it to be a man in a costume or disguise. But the police never actually saw him. Now, another question I had was about the guy who said he got followed home to the Hotel Henry. I couldn't understand where the paper said he was walking from and to. Jerry Hamm has sent me enough info that not only do I understand what the witness was saying better, but you and I, are now going to do the werewolf walk. We're going to walk the 15 blocks or so inside of Google Street View, and I'll continue to tell you about all this. Now imagine this was at night, and you think you hear someone or something following you. You've been hearing your neighbors talking about a 7 or 8 foot tall werewolf being in town, and you are sure you hear someone behind you. Each time you turn around, you don't see anyone there. Could it be that werewolf? Here's another excerpt from that same 2013 article. The next day, a front-page story talked about how a man reported at 1:24 a.m. that day that, quote, something, unquote, followed him on foot from Dietrich, that's spelled Deatrick, and South Clinton Streets, to the Hotel Henry above the former Valentine Theater. The police reported the man was near hysteria. Before 2 a.m., another call came in from a woman who said her friend showed up almost in hysterics because something had rattled her door and tried to get into her house. A single report of the Wolfman happened early the next day. The reports only lasted a few weeks before quieting. No one was ever arrested in connection with the incidents. And here we are. This is our stop. This is the site of the former Hotel Henry. Thanks for finding it for me, Jerry Hamm. This theater, which is now a church on the ground floor, was once the Liberty Theater. Above the church is the building that was once called the Hotel Henry. When the Hotel Henry was closed in 1975, the newspaper called it the only hotel in Defiance. These days, if you type hotels in Defiance, Ohio into Google Maps, you get a Hampton Inn, a Holiday Inn, a Quality Inn, a Comfort Inn, and a Super 8. So it seems to me that Defiance must have had some better times in the years since this original set of events took place. Although the Super 8 is $68 a night, so it's not like it's become Davos. The original owners of the theater are who built the hotel on top, and they ran it for 47 years. So the werewolf seemed to be kind of an event that year in Defiance at just around this time of season, when it was really hot. The Toledo Blade went out and interviewed Defiance citizens to find out how upset they were about all of this. "I haven't heard anybody talking about it," Mrs. Richards said. "She lives in the neighborhood adjacent to the tracks, but I make sure my doors are locked at night." "It just doesn't sound like something that would happen in this neighborhood," Kathy Keenast said. "This is probably the safest neighborhood around." "I don't think the adults are scared, but it has scared a lot of the children," one man who declined to identify himself said. "I live in the neighborhood and I've got children. They're on the lookout for him and anything suspicious." "It doesn't worry me," Dale Ott, another resident of the neighborhood, said. "I've got kids, and I let them play out day and night." Wonder where those kids are today. Some elderly citizens of the area aren't so quick to brush off the incident. "If I see him, the werewolf, the police are gonna find out who he is," Robert Figg said. "That's because they'll have to take him to the hospital to get the buckshot out." None of the day shift train crewmen seemed disturbed working in the switching yard where the werewolf was seen. "Oh, don't worry about it," Russell Brown said, who cleans out boxcars. "If he's gonna get you, he's gonna get you." Mr. Brown said that he had heard crewmen talk about the werewolf occasionally, but the topic is more popular outside the railroad yards. "They say he has hair all over and he's about 7 feet tall," Mr. Brown said. "From what I've heard, I can say this guy is ugly as hell." Chief Breckler speculated that the disguised person either lives in the neighborhood where he was seen, or he is riding in on one of the trains each night from another town. But everything at this stage has been purely speculation. "Descriptions are too vague," Mr. Breckler said. Thomas Jones and Ted Davis were the N&W crewmen that reported seeing the werewolf. Mr. Jones said he thought the whole thing was a joke at first, but he changed his mind when he and Mr. Davis saw the hairy creature on Sunday. Meanwhile, police crews have been assigned to extensive patrol of the area at night. One investigation officer speculated that the werewolf might be a night shift worker at one of the nearby industrial plants. Now check this out, another sighting of what may have been the same creature or man in a location about a 90-minute drive east of Defiance. This happened around the same time as the Defiance sightings. Ape-like animal reported sighted north of Tiffin. This is from the Findlay, Ohio Republican Courier, Friday, August 4th, 1972. A Tiffin man told Seneca County Sheriff's Deputy Thursday that he saw an ape-like animal while walking along a wooded area on River Road north of Tiffin. Now, cutting away from the article for a second, when they say River Road north of Tiffin, I think they're referring to a road running along the Sandusky River over here. The only river road I can find in Tiffin is South River Road, which is totally in a different place. Back to the article. Harold Annan of 155 Thomas Street said that, quote, ape, unquote, was covered with hair and had wolf-like ears and fangs. He said it was 6 or 7 feet tall and it was hunched over. Mr. Annan said he ran for his car and drove off when the ape saw him. The ape with wolf ears and fangs. Weldon Neff, Seneca County game warden, checked the wooded area about 6 p.m. and said he found no tracks or any signs of vegetation disturbance. So, an upright furry creature 6 or 7 feet tall with wolf ears and fangs. They call it an ape, I guess because it was furry and walked upright. Dogs aren't known to walk upright. Sounds more like the Defiance Werewolf to me. And this happened, as I said, in the same state, an hour and a half driving to the east of the Defiance Werewolf. I guess the day after the last Defiance sighting. Maybe he hitched a ride eastward. So Jerry Hamm was not done with his research yet. He noticed the similarity between the thumbnail from my previous video and a cover of one edition of Stephen King's Silver Bullet. I did not consciously do that. I don't remember ever seeing that particular Stephen King cover before. Jerry wonders if the real-life events in Defiance inspired King, since there are so many similarities between the two. For instance, the werewolf first attacked a railway worker in the Stephen King work, and he used a wooden bat to attack sometimes as well. King wrote it in the 80s but said it in the 70s. I think Jerry is right. It's the kind of story that sounds like Stephen King, or maybe Kolchak the Night Stalker. I can imagine King using parts of the original story to build his work around, especially since the Defiance Werewolf wasn't as well known in the 1980s. It has become well known enough, though, that there was actually a Dogman symposium in Defiance in 2016. You can see in this ad, also supplied by Jerry Hamm, that longtime Pennsylvania weirdness researcher Stan Gordon, TV's famous Nick Redfern, and those two guys that wear that same hat, they were all there. Not to mention Linda Godfrey, the author of The Beast of Bray Road, the book that really popularized Dogman and started all of the modern interest on the subject. Now, the thing that Jerry Hamm sent to me which amazed me probably the most was that he actually has a guess as to who the werewolf might have been. Some people spend years trying to solve who Jack the Ripper was, and Jerry Hamm is the Defiance Werewolf version of that. His suggestion is very interesting, both as a suspect and as a completely creepy and terrifying individual. But just to give you an idea of how utterly strange Defiance has always been, before we talk about Mr. Hamm's suspect in the 70s, I'm going to read you this article he found in the Crescent News of October 20th, 1909, a half century before any of these things we've been talking about took place. Buster Brave, and shook up the ghost a little bit. Man in Black introduced to East Defiance Doggy. Who is the ghost? Problem is up to the police. During his former visits, the ghost was seen by numerous people. One young man was frightened almost out of his boots while sitting in his front yard by Mr. Ghost appearing from behind a tree. Another front porch couple were rudely interrupted by Mr. Ghost appearing from around the corner. Many a young man returning from his home has experienced an interview with Mr. Ghost. The police for a time thought they knew who the party was who was playing the part of a ghost, but were mistaken. They at present have no clue as to whom it might be. If the local police force want to earn the gratitude of those who have reason to be out late at night, let them capture his ghost ship. Although he attempts no harm, he may cause harm to someone by fright, or he may even meet with some fatality himself from someone who might be looking for him with a gun. Anyway, it is not the proper thing for an enterprising progressive town of the Middle West to be troubled by a ghost. The Man in Black, or the Ghost, as some people term him, experienced a close call Tuesday, according to reports from East Defiance. It seems that his ghost ship has been making himself at home on the east side for several evenings, and Tuesday night he took after a group of small boys. The lads happened to have a dog with them, however, who was not so easily frightened as the boys, and the brave little doggy stood his ground, much to the sorrow of the ghost, who lost portions of his costume. It is said that Mr. Ghost did not vanish away in a cloud of mist as a real spook should, but took to his heels in the method of an ordinary human being, and hit the turf some. About a year ago, the police made a special effort to locate him. Officers were stationed in each ward, but his ghost ship probably had a tip from the spirit world, as he did not make his appearance while the officers were vigilant. For a long time he remained quiet, and was almost forgotten, and several months ago he appeared in North Defiance. Shortly after, he was reported to have been seen on Wayne Street near the corner of 5th. Again, Tuesday night he had a narrow escape in East Defiance. So, he was tall and he wore a black cape like Batman? Now let's jump forward from 1909 to 1968, 49 years after that article was published in Defiance. Now I'll read you this one. The Defiance, Ohio Crescent News, Friday, May 17th, 1968. Wanted. Brave man with wooden stake. The Defiance County Sheriff's Office is faced with an impossible task. Finding a vampire. The culprit has been reported as haunting the Canal Road area, and the authorities have attempted to investigate the report. The description of the vampire goes something like this. He is of medium height and weight, and was last seen wearing a black cape, which highlights his pure white face. As reports circulate around town, eventually filtering their way into the sheriff's office, other strange aspects of the case reveal themselves. It seems that one well-meaning citizen shot 2 rounds into the head of the ghoul, but to no avail. An attempt to outrun the vampire in an auto was fruitless, as it proved speedier than the car, despite the fact that it is reported to be crippled. This affliction, however, might be traced to the rumor that 2 youths hit him in the legs with a long chain, again with no serious effect. The only problem with the descriptions in the above paragraph is that officials have been unable to locate anyone who A. shot a vampire twice in the head lately, B. was outrun by a ghoul on foot while driving an auto, or C. hit such a culprit on the legs with a long chain. Sheriff Doug Ziegler, in explaining a highly skeptical attitude concerning the case, said that there has been, quote, absolutely no evidence to substantiate the existence of anything or anyone fitting such a description, unquote. He said that what investigation his officers have been able to make has been hampered by onlookers. Also, he said residents of the Canal Road area have notified his office that trespassing charges will be filed against anyone on their property claiming to be looking for the ghoul. So, the police in 1968 there thought it was funny to mock people's wild claims of seeing a vampire-like man wearing a cape. Let's see how that aged. 9 days or less than 1 year later, on May 8th, 1969, here's an article from the same paper. Thursday, May 8th, 1969. Sheriff probes alleged nastiness. Defiance County authorities have assumed the investigation of an alleged very nasty attack which apparently occurred south of Defiance early this morning. Defiance police were first notified of the incident when the alleged victim came into the station shortly before 4 a.m., claiming to have amnesia and claiming to have been assaulted. Subsequent investigation revealed that she had been in a gas station earlier in the morning, claiming then to have amnesia. She stayed there until a man whom she recognized came in, the attendant reported, and she asked him to take her home. It was sometime later that she showed up at the police station. She was questioned, then taken to Defiance Hospital, where she was admitted. A strange man who seems to have hypnotic power over an amnesiac woman. What does that have to do with the werewolf? Well, in the later 1970s, someone got arrested in Florida for kidnapping a woman, doing horrible things I can't talk about on YouTube to her, and literally drinking half her blood. What does that have to do with the Defiance Werewolf? Well, this guy they arrested in Florida was named John Crutchley, and he was from Defiance, Ohio. Yes, he was there at the time of the cape-wearing vampire sightings that the police assured everyone were not happening. Yes, he was again still there in Defiance when the police admitted that the werewolf sightings people were talking about actually were happening. So Mr. Hamm's research was so thorough that he even found 2 mentions of Crutchley when he was younger in the fire rescue calls section of the paper. In January 1970, he injured his hand and got listed in the paper for that. It also lists his address as 301 Route Lane. According to Jerry Hamm, that was a trailer park which got moved later by the government because it was in a flood zone. That was around 1976 or 77 when Crutchley decided to move to Kalamazoo and got himself a job in the GM plant. Jerry Hamm got himself a copy of the true crime book written about Crutchley by J.T. Hunter, and he pulled out a list of facts in the book which may or may not have a bearing on the Defiance Werewolf and or the Defiance Vampire. Page 66. Crutchley had an IQ of 168. That's good. Page 80. December 1980. Crutchley had top secret access to much of the Pentagon. Wait, what? According to Jerry Hamm, he was a genius with electronics, and Crutchley wrote code for the Navy. The Navy considered filing espionage charges against him for having classified information, but didn't. I wonder why. Jerry Hamm elaborates. Crutchley wrote computer code for the Navy. He had access to the Pentagon because of this. He was possibly involved in taking the lives of 2 women at a naval air station in Norfolk, Virginia in the early 1980s. The speculation is that he stole their files that were on their person. As to why, we don't know. Belief is he was fulfilling a fantasy of his that he was a spy. Or maybe he really was a spy. No further investigation of this aspect occurred that we know of. So this guy may have been a spy or may have just been a lunatic pretending to be a spy and killing people, but in either case he didn't go to jail for any of that. Page 113. In possession of classified info about U.S. Navy operations, subway deployment data, satellite images of U.S. ships in the Middle East. Why would he not get punished for stealing that? Like if you or I had that stuff, we'd be in solitary in federal prison right now, don't you think? Let's see what else this book tells us about this very unique fellow. Page 122. Interested in occult. Fascinated by Satanism. Page 136. When Crutchley was born, he had a stillborn twin. Page 154. Crutchley was another breed of monster. Page 159. His victim, Jackie Lee Horton, said it seemed to her that Crutchley had possessed supernatural strength. She said, quote, "I saw something in him, as if he was really 2 people, unquote." Page 179, Greg Raub, a former cellmate of Crutchley's, said he came to believe that Crutchley had some kind of mind control ability, some supernatural power, like a vampire's hypnotic ability to entrance his prey. Remember the woman in the gas station with no memory? But she remembered that one guy. I wonder what he looked like. Page 180, having a very powerful mind, almost like he looked through you, into your mind, into your soul. Page 185, Patrick Albert Dontel, Crutchley's cellmate, said he once felt an odd chill and shivered as if a ghostly presence had passed through him. He looked up and saw Crutchley standing like a specter beside him. His next one's pretty creepy. Page 229. Robert Ressler, FBI profiler, said Crutchley had learned to fake being human. I'm guessing that he meant the guy was sociopathic without empathy, pretending to have normal emotions to put on a show and disguise himself, but the wording sure does make him sound like a supernatural being from a parallel reality, don't you think? Page 231, Ressler says, Crutchley drank his victim's blood. That type of unexplainable and repugnant behavior would have typically been attributed to supernatural sources, such as vampires and werewolves. I don't know if Ressler knew this, but in fact in some belief systems vampires can become werewolves as easily as they can become bats. Page 265. Crutchley's wife, Karen, go ahead, laugh, believed her husband possessed some power over her that kept her from leaving him. Sounds like he was the Karen. Page 286. Ray Malone, longtime friend, stayed with Crutchley one weekend. On the second night, he woke up after 12 a.m. petrified with fear of something he could not see, too afraid to move. One thought dominated his mind, and that was that he had to get away from Crutchley. Page 326. Crutchley's first victim had been a girl he dated in Defiance College. He ended her story in his dormitory, then stashed her in the boiler of the dormitory's furnace. Shades of Freddy Krueger. So he was born October 1st, 1946, and he died on the last day of March in 2002 in prison. He had actually been paroled one time, but he got caught smoking weed and thrown back in only one day later. In Florida, that meant he went back in to serve the full sentence for his original crime, not for weed possession. When he passed away suddenly in 2002, it was ruled one time as an accident, and another time as him doing it himself. Where have we heard of an evil person who was in prison and had secret information on important government people, and then he passed on mysteriously in his jail cell? I don't know where I heard that before. I'm suddenly having amnesia. So I don't know if Crutchley was the Defiance Werewolf, but I do think he was the second of the Defiance black-caped weirdos. And I do strongly suspect that he was the one who came and took that amnesiac woman away with him. Either way, I'd say that's some remarkable research that Jerry Hamm just shared with all of us, and we owe him a big thank you at the very least. If you'd like to check out Mr. Hamm's work online, he has a special interest in Defiance, of course, but he also has an interest in my old friend, the late John A. Keel. Check out his YouTube channel, Zoomar1, Zoomar1. Check out his Scribd.com, I don't know what that is. So the Scribd.com/Zoomar1 page, he has downloadable files that he uploaded, mostly John Keel stuff, and also other UFO 14 phenomenon. It used to be a free site, but it's now a pay site. They do have a free trial of 7 days. He's also Zoomar1 on Facebook, again Zoomar1, and he's got a John Keel Facebook page that I will put in the description. I can't read that one out loud. It's got all these numbers in it. So thank you, Defiance native Jerry Hamm. And now, since this one got long and much darker than we usually get, I'd like to read one final article, this one from 1916 that Jerry Hamm sent in. I have to say there aren't any writers in modern-day newspapers that could even write something as clever and witty as this next one. I hope you get a chuckle out of it, and it's called Defiance is Not the Garden of Eden. Defiance Democrat, Thursday, August 10th, 1916. The East Side has a mystery. Maybe it's a spook. Maybe it's only an alleged spook. Maybe it's only a man. But whatever it is, the object aroused considerable excitement and caused tongues to unlimber and wag as they seldom have. Complaints have been filed with the police authorities that the spook or man has been exposing himself from a window in the old Groegg elevator, and Chief Julius Spangler and his gallant band of city patrolmen, after due consideration of the circumstances, have brought in a verdict that man or spook shall not expose his person in this city in this day of the Lord. Their ruling decides for all times to come that Defiance is not the Garden of Eden, and that fig leaf attire is not the proper garment to be seen in a window of any establishment in the city, much less an old abandoned elevator. And just to show that they are not prejudiced against men, Chief Spangler and his capable patrolmen aver, allege, asseverate, and affirm that not even those of the feminine sex will be permitted to go around in any Garden of Eden wearing apparel, although this censorship does not apply to one's home in the nighttime these scorching evenings, when one may do just about as he or she pleases, so long as they do not appear at the windows. Stone Age attire. The trouble arose when it was reported that a man had appeared in a window at the old Groegg Mill in an attire that was suitable for the Stone Age. The chief of police and his men were summoned to catch the spook or man. The city arsenal accompanied the band of officers. They searched that mill with a great show of bravery, defying the specters, spirits, disembodied souls, or whatever else might be lurking about the place. But nothing was found. Then they searched the weeds and tall grass in the neighborhood, but without avail. Now everybody is wondering what it was, and watching for the object to reappear. Well, I hope if it does that you're not there having a look at it. With that, I'll finally call a close to this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.